Greetings, everyone. Thanks for coming to the second Badger History Group lecture of the season. And I want to thank the generous member donations and gifts that make these lectures possible, as well as the rest of our work. We're mostly volunteer run, but as some of you know, Berlin now is working as an actual paid staff. So that's a fun thing. I want to thank Verlin for getting these lectures going several years ago, and also to thank Heather, who keeps stuff moving every lecture and is the IT person and commander of the event. Ori for backing us up with video camera and taking care of the seating and lighting, and to Dan for putting together this great series of lectures this year. Speaking of which, the next lecture is going to be on November 8th, and that'll be Kurt Miney. His talk is titled Converging Histories, Community Conservation and the Badger Reuse Process, 1997 to 2002, those early years after the Army declared the plant excess. I welcome you all to check our website, the activities page, for future presentations, and also follow us on Facebook at Badger History Group, BHG, for upcoming events. For those that are here on Zoom tonight, please keep yourself muted. It's best to keep your video off to improve broadband access, and save your questions for the end, and you can present your questions on chat if you'd like, or comment. Heather will be monitoring that during the presentation, and the Q&A will be at the end. I also want to mention a couple other presentations that are coming up that aren't Badger History Group. One is the Sauk Prairie Conservation Alliance is going to be giving their first lecture, I believe, of the season on November 16th at the Sauk City Library. Their series, We Are Sauk Prairie, and this first lecture will be on oak savannas. It's at 6:30 on November 16th. The other one I want to mention is Janice Rice, who's a Ho-Chunk historian and librarian, and she's going to talk on Ho-Chunk history, the removal and return. That'll be coming up on Monday, this Monday, at the Ruth Culver Library, or the Prairie Sauk Library, at 6 o'clock, I believe. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan to introduce the speaker. And again, thanks for being here.
If you have taken part at all in any of our lectures in the past, you know that there are a lot of diverse stories to be told about the Badger lands. And from ball powder and bunkers to birds and butterflies. And it is part of our mission of the Badger History Group to preserve and publicize those stories. The story we're going to hear tonight is one we probably wish we didn't have to hear, but it's an important legacy of the powder plant era, and that is the contamination that occurred, soil and water. And we're pleased to have with us tonight Joel Janssen. He's a hydrogeologist and project manager for SpecPro Professional Services, which contracts with the Army to monitor the contamination on the Badger lands and the surrounding properties affected by Badger. And although Joel and SpecPro team have offices on the property in the old fire station, in fact, I think they share that property with the Little Eagles Art Foundation, and we heard from Melanie last month about their work out there. So they have their offices on the property, but for probably most of the visitors and the general public, they're pretty much invisible, even though they do so much work. And they have this critical responsibility of serving as kind of the central resource for anything about contamination issues stemming from Badger. So the BHG mission statement says, We help each other learn from the past, engage with the present, and guide our shared future. And Joel's work over 20 years fits into every aspect of that mission. And so we're very fortunate to have him here with us tonight. So help me give him a welcome.
Thanks, Dan. That was more than I expected. Dan is actually Jeff Crisco's neighbor. Jeff is also at our office. And so he does a lot of the outdoor work. But so we do have a small team on site. But we had, when we first started, there was a couple hundred people that probably everyone in the area knew somebody that worked here while we were tearing the place down, building a landfill and stuff. So yeah, it's taken a lot of people in the Sauk Prairie area to tear things down after it was built very quickly. It took a lot longer to tear down, I guess, is what we're saying. But so a little bit of background on myself. I grew up in Mount Horeb, moved to Mazomanie, and drive by the place and like, oh, they're hiding something, you know, the typical, what's going on behind the cornfield off 12. Never even thought I'd be doing environmental remediation at all. But lo and behold, I would drive to Reedsburg to go to Verbeker Associates, and we got a project to work on the powerhouse in the 90s. So the powerhouse had a huge fuel oil spill. They had these, actually the tanks are actually in this picture right here. So these are some of the above ground fuel tanks. And then there was an underground line into the powerhouse and released many thousands of gallons of fuel oil. And so we just came in to start helping with the project. And Olin Corporation was the operating contractor, and they would hire a lot of consultants in the area to come in and do their projects. So it was an interesting start, and we were like, hey, this sounds great. We did a bunch of landfill work for Olin in the past, back in the 80s and 90s as a company. So that was just an intro to, and then there was an opening in the early 2000s, and they said, hey, we need somebody to work here full time. And I said, well, it's a little bit of a drive to come up from the Madison area. But you know, 40 minutes drive every day to work. It's only been 20 years, but I guess I'm still driving up here. But overall, I've been doing talks in this room since the early 2000s when the Restoration Advisory Board was being involved. So we would stand up here and have the public talk, ask questions, and I was the Army's representative and still am. We have a meeting next week to have people try to ask questions or learn more about what the Army is trying to do with the facility. I would have to say, if I had the one thing that people would question is why does it have to take so long for people to get something done? And the Army has the same issues because there's a new person every couple years, different people in charge. I have to train somebody new that works for the Army because they've never heard of the Badger ammunition plant, or they've never dealt with ammunition. Not everybody is familiar with ammunition facilities. So it is a challenge. And so we've kind of created a niche with knowing what goes on and how you can clean up explosive material. It's in the water. So if anyone's familiar, it's in every groundwater plume we have on site. So that is definitely a concern for a lot of people. No one ever thought about dinitrotoluene that much 20 or 30 years ago that you could be drinking it. It was something you can't smell. You have no idea it's there. It's hidden. So I pick a well and I go, oh yeah, this is contaminated. It smells just fine. It looks fine. So it's different than other chemicals that you go, oh, this smells like, oh, this is irony water. You know, everyone has irony water around here, but you wouldn't know. So there's some challenges there. So I'll start with a couple photos. This is an old acid area. It was mentioned in the beginning. The picture on the left. So the old acid area was starting to be taken down by Olin in 2002 when I started. And we contracted, as we did, with a company to tear it down. And I would say they did a horrible job because we questioned everything they did, because all the pipes there were lead lined to keep the acid from corroding any of the piping. And we were always wondering where all the scrap was, where the lead was. But overall, because of the lead pipe, you had to think about, well, where did that go somewhere? Well, it turns out we had several feet deep and the entire facility was contaminated with lead that was way higher than should stay in the ground, according to the state. So if you have like lead paint around your house, that's nothing compared to what was in here. It wasn't even allowed to go to the landfill. We had to scrape up the material. So this whole area had been raked with a large bucket to mix in a material to treat the soil before we could haul it to the landfill. So, and that was much bigger acreage than the Army expected. We warned them and they didn't believe it. But we said, this is something that's going to be more than you can expect to spend. But they had a lot of money. They were throwing millions of dollars like every year, 10 million, 15 million, tear this place down as fast as you can. Literally meetings every week. How fast did you get it done? What can you get done next week? That was you were trying to progress. So this particular location, all the buildings had already been torn down. We came in as SpecPro in the mid 2000s, and we're trying to clean it up, doing test samples. The laboratory was running everything on site. They were all SpecPro employees. So we could do it all internal. All the backhoe operators, all the trucks, they were all our employees. But we did get it cleaned, this particular old acid area. So I think this is an area that the concrete pile is sitting on right now. That was crushed concrete from Highway 78. Well, that they wanted to put in Highway 78. But the tanks got cut up. Actually, the tanks didn't even have hardly any contamination. They were barely used. There was no contamination. Am I in the wrong view? Oh, okay. So the fuel oil wasn't even hardly contaminated beneath the tanks. But that's just a small smidgen of all the different locations that we were dealing with. For instance, I just took these aerial photos. I had done a flyover in May of Badger with my dad's airplane. And so I just provided one photo. So this is actually something totally different here now. This is the final creek. And then the wastewater treatment plant is right at the bottom of the photo. And then the wastewater treatment plant has a infiltration basin out here in this mode area. So that's the Bluffview Sanitary District. They took the land over after the Army determined that the groundwater treatment system was no longer needed. And we removed everything from the building, and then the Bluffview took it over. So that's the current owner of actually all this property down along the creek. And then USDA farms all this land, but they also own some of it too. The creek is where, of course, the 50, 60, 70 million gallons per day that came out of the facility went into the creek area, which was obviously very polluted at the time. But of course, in the olden days, pollution controls were worrying about how much acid was in the water, how much sediment. No one was really thinking about what was in the sediment. So I have some more stuff on this particular area. And then this is just showing the bike trail. coming through. And then there's settling ponds that continued out towards the east. So sometimes it can be very deceiving to think of this looks like a really bad site, you know, with the old acid area, it's really exposed, and then everything is so green, and you might think everything's great, but it isn't always the case. Just because grass grows doesn't mean it's perfect, but this is actually quite an old map, but I just happen to have it in a different slide as we were talking about, oh, how do you get rid of that little, can I get rid of this? Oh, I was like, how is that up there? So just a little overview, and maybe some people know everything I'm going to say, but just the different areas of production. We study the history for what we do since I started here in fine detail. I was told to go out and look for anything. You got a truck, just go and look for something that you need to investigate. Think of an area that we're not thinking of. So I would just drive around the buildings by myself before we tear them down. We were doing chemical inventories of buildings, stuff that was left, looking at all the fuel oil tanks. None of the tanks here leaked. There was gasoline tanks everywhere across the site. Not one of them leaked because of the sand. It was a very good resistance, so none of the tanks actually rusted. So as much fuel as at this site, there's not one fuel site here like you have a gas station in town. We don't have any of those issues here. We don't have any gasoline contamination at Badger anymore. So there's some interesting side, but so you have like nitrocellulose production is all, you know, just coming through the main gate here. And that's where a lot of issues that we're coming up against have with the powder. And then of course, all of the water that was used in the nitrocellulose production area was huge volumes going down into the creek. And then the burning grounds down here, which has been the most contaminated site that was started in the 80s and 90s. So that's received the most amount of attention, where things were burnt on the ground, all these grains or rocket waste. So they've created a huge issue that has, you know, caused most of the groundwater contamination that anyone had identified with. Little to be known that some people didn't really think about. Up in here, there was a waste pit called the deterrent burning ground, and they didn't really pay attention to it as much as a propellant. But there is a plume, of course, coming out of that area where waste deterrent was liquid poured into the sand pits and then lit on fire. And then I haven't seen this, but I know that then they were going back to their office and then let it burn. But that's the SOP. That's the Olin Corporation SOP, is they can leave that burn and then go back to their office and then come back later. But that this Roger Spear Farm is just off to the east. I don't know what the Spear Farm ever thought of that, but that's kind of interesting that, but all of that waste eventually also seeped into the sand. And I'll show you then, I've been dealing with that plume of contamination from the deterrent burning ground, and the Army has capped site. They've spent lots of time in the past trying to figure it out. And then we have nitroglycerin. We were just talking about the nitroglycerin area and paste area to the south. And then of course, rocket area, which is the huge area. And of course, this also had dinitropyline issues, which we have a very large groundwater plume that actually comes out of this area. So the original focus when I first started here was the propellant burning ground, some of the deterrent burning ground, and no one talked about this rocket central area until they said, we're starting to, we want to look at some wells. And then all of a sudden it started really becoming an issue, and not too many people gave it thought. And then the last one that came was, we found that there's more groundwater contamination from this nitrocellulose area. And then we called it the nitrocellulose plume, just because they said, what do you want to call it? But it's pretty small, but that wasn't ever thought of before. So these are mostly about, where is dinitrotoluene in the water that is supposed to be unsafe to drink. But of course, no one's drinking water on site. The well that we drank this water, but the well that is served here is so deep that we were sampling it all the time, and it's never been contaminated. But in other parts of the area, it's not safe to drink, and the Army restricts drinking it. Anybody that buys the property or got the property, they cannot drink the water in most of the site. So Army thought, mostly that they were good to go. As some people in the area figured out with the water system, let's see, the water system that was going to be built, which we were a part of, was going to solve everyone's problems. So me being as person that deals with contamination, the water system wasn't going to do anything about the contamination. It was going to shut everything down and say that everyone can drink water from these wells. So that was contentious. I actually went to public meetings where we had to talk about the water system. And that was back in 2013 time, so about 10 years ago. It was clean water, well done. There was even a slogan. There was a lot of hoopla that the Army had to push out, but it was not cleaning any of that up. The water would just continue to do whatever it wanted to do. I wouldn't say everyone agrees with the Army, even that works for the Army. So, you can't agree with your employer all the time. But we had a lot of geologists, a lot of engineers that we just were told, this is what the Army wants to do. This is what the Pentagon wants to do, but I don't think that's what they want to do anymore. So that's what I'm told over the years lately, is we do not feel that that is appropriate anymore, and we want to clean it up. So just an overview of the plumes. So I had talked about, up here we have the deterrent burning ground plume, and this is a very small, narrow plume, but yet when I started here, no one ever thought the plume left the site. And the Army Corps of Engineers were here. They were investigating. They had a lot of ideas, and they spent a bunch of money. But not until, probably 15 years ago, we started figuring out that, hey, we should look off site. And we figured out it's finally moved off site. And so now we actually just installed a well right here. If Ori probably has seen us drilling, because Ori lives just down the road from that well. And so the Army is just starting to figure out if there is going to be additional contamination from this plume migrating down towards Wiggins Bay, down here. And so that's continuously flowing. So you're constantly, it's not really a static situation. The plume has been moving. And so you got to keep up with, and constantly informing the Army about what's the situation on the ground, as we call it. They're in San Antonio. They don't really know anybody, and there's always new people. So we always got to go, oh, this is who lives here. And this is, to know the history of who's around the area. So there's even been a private well that's been replaced at a residence down here that had exceedances. So obviously the goal for like this area is to keep the residents down here from having the same situation. But the remediation hasn't happened yet. And it probably isn't going to happen for a couple more years, I'm sure. So the state has been requiring additional testing and potentially expanding that particular area. So that's a hot topic now, for us and then the Army. And then, so now you have the central plume out here. And this is the one that I said we didn't really exist before. And now this goes to Water's Edge. And so there's been a lot of talk about Water's Edge area and dealing with their issues, and a lot of wells, and a lot of wells down there. So offsite. And then the propellant burning ground plume, which is the most popular. And we still are doing some more well installation in that plume. And then this is the nitrocellulose plume, which is just the on-site portion. So all the wells are shown on this map, all the dots spread out over 300 or so. So it had dinitretoluene, which is in all 4 plumes. Mostly we have in the propellant burning ground, you have the carbon tetrachloride, chloroform, ethyl ether, and trichloroethene. So when we first started, ethyl ether didn't exist in anyone's mind. So we expanded the Army's thought, and we actually started figuring out that it was in the water, and we started testing for it. And so ethyl ether is been talked at meetings in the past, that people have had it in their wells, and it is from the production facility. Ether is part of nitrocellulose production. We had stills, tanks. It was in the process. No one knows exactly how it's getting into the water or how that occurred exactly. And I've gotten lots of questions about why is it in the water and why is it so deep? So it is 200 some feet deep in some of these locations. So bedrock can be 200 to 250 feet deep in the propellant burning ground, or the bedrock. The bedrock is, but the groundwater table is still around 100. So it's 150 feet below the surface of the water is ethyl ether, and it smells just like you expect you would smell ether. It can be very strong, and that's what's in the water still. We still have very sandy soil. So these plumes have been able to move quite frequently and not really stopped like if this was, say, clay. So it's caused a lot of different issues because of where they built the facility. They wanted the water, they wanted all this available materials to build all the structures with the sand. Here's some recent, so I talked about well installation, just to give you some different pictures. This is actually the bike trail, this first photo on the left. Dan had stopped by, I know, when we were out there drilling. So these wells, there's 3 wells out there. They show, you know, some chlorinated contamination, but not actually that high, that's just fine. But these wells will be staying by the bike trail for a long time, just like the other ones have. The photo to the right is actually brand new. We just were out there last week, and we were by the landfill. So if anyone has been out to where the existing landfill was, it's all fenced off. There's some new wells that we just put in, and that would be for the central plume. And then just showing what the rods they're using. They're using like a 8-inch diameter casing, and they pound and rotate the casing in, and it makes a lot of noise. It uses a vibration technique. And we've used this technique out here for the last 20 years a lot, but it's a newer technology than some of the older drilling technologies. These are actually, I think, probably out on Highway 78. I just had this picture. This is my coworker, Jeff, who we have to do all the maintenance. So part of our contract is we sample the wells, we maintain around the wells. No other company comes in and like deals with where things are located. That's just part of what the Army's paying us to do. So a little bit of just how far this has been going. For the people that maybe have lived around, it's been pretty challenging. So I've seen some reports from the late 70s, but they weren't really that much into groundwater. So around 80 that we've been looking at reports. And then I know by 1990, it was much more, you know, they're getting more public about the information that there was contamination. And of course, as we expected, no one thought the contamination left the site. They weren't looking. So another, you know, it's tough for people to think about that. And so no one expected it to be off site. And so they weren't looking for it. And then slowly they started going, hey, maybe we need to drill off site. Maybe the community is affected. And then residential wells were contaminated in the in the 90s, they found that out. Then you started looking more at the burning grounds and what you needed to do to the burning grounds. You need to cover it or remove material. Lots of different remediation has been done there. The whole area is capped, engineered cap, so no extra water goes down, but the water underneath still can flow beneath. So it doesn't stop that. You know, you stopped anything up at the surface. And then the Army was trying to get out of the facility. They had this water system that they were pushing. And so they were really pushing to get all the remediation stopped. And so they got the treatment system shut down. And unfortunately, I was involved, I guess. I didn't really want to. I didn't want to shut them down, but our job, and actually Jeff, who's still here, he was running the treatment building even then. And we were told it had to be shut down within a year because they had to get out. You know, the Army wanted to get out. So, I mean, that's not really a knock on any of the current people that are at the Army, but that's just the situation that it was run by the BRAC, which is base realignment, is they wanted the property to go away as fast as possible. So the system was shut down. It was turned over to Bluffview. And just a couple of years later, there was a lot more issues. The Army wasn't building the system, other turnover within the state, and new Army people came in and said, hey, we need you guys now to work on another feasibility of what we need to do with all the groundwater plumes, not just the propellant burning ground, which is the one that everyone thought about. No one was treating the other plumes, even thinking about it. So unfortunately, we've been still in the same slow process for the last 4 years, where you're planning, you're writing documents, and we're having meetings to talk about it. But so like currently the Army is in a proposed plan that talks about remediation, lays out what they're doing, but still negotiating with the DNR at the same time. No money has been authorized to construct a facility to treat the water again, but estimates have been made and they need to move on to signing a document that the Army will do it. So they haven't signed a document that says they will do this next phase of remediation. So it's been pretty long. I mean, considering the system was shut down 2016, in 3 years, it'll be 10 years. I don't know if there'll be actually remediation in 3 years. I doubt it. But they're pretty careful. That's maybe good and bad, but they're not racing to get to that stage. It's pretty complicated. I don't think I have a slide. I don't have a slide on that, but so they're supposed to do in situ injection. And we help write these reports, so I can be blamed for some of the information. So you inject molasses or vegetable oil, and then you're treating the D&T within the groundwater. We haven't done a study, so we have to do an actual in-ground study to prove it'll work here. But the government has not funded such a study, unfortunately. They're waiting through their different process that they want to do. So we think it'll work, but it's really a large project. If anyone's read the documents, it's tens of millions of dollars to do it, because you have to do it throughout the entire plume. You can't just do part of the plume that has D&T, because 100 feet over, there may still be contamination. So it's pretty aggressive, but it's a one-time thing that you would do. You wouldn't have a pumping system. It would be, you're injecting, it'd be probably a couple of years. And then you have to make sure it didn't come back. So it's still, there's a process. Not yet, no. Yeah, so that's kind of where that situation is. I mean, there's a lot of issues with groundwater. So other things, I was just going to show some other various things that we've been involved in here is up on the left here, just tearing down. These are some pictures that we've had. We have thousands of pictures on our system from building demo. Everybody in these pictures would have been a SpecPro employee working, and most of these people are from within 100 or 60 miles or less of the facility, and now work in other parts of the region. So mostly this is metal. I'm not sure if this is I think this is the powerhouse side. And then we actually tore some of the powerhouse down with blasting crew, and we toppled it with charges because some parts of it was just too unsafe to deal with. This is, I believe, out in this Rocket, but all the asbestos had to be taken off the outside of the building, and then everything inside of the building that was friable had to be wrapped. And then, of course, everything that I've talked about, anything you think, whoa, what happened to that? It's all in the landfill that is fenced in. Everything is there. Everything that we've dug out over the last 20 years, anything from a building that you think was contaminated, it's all sitting in the landfill. So even some of these sprays, they were checking for like explosives, to make sure there wasn't something on the concrete, to see if the concrete was safe to be broken up. Lots of inspections were done, and some of that isn't even, they wouldn't even want me out there. They said, please don't, you do something else. Because there was other people, there was other geologists or something, and sometimes they just didn't want me to see it. But yeah, then they're scraping around all these buildings and trying to clean up any extra asbestos or what they thought could be contamination. And then they're just going down like 2 feet. And then we went out and took samples to say, if there was anything to find. It wasn't an extensive progress that, like everything got sampled, but there was a lot of sampling around like these buildings as they got taken down. Just showing that might actually, I'm trying to think of, Jesse was one of our backhoe operators. That might be him. He did a lot of this demo work. This is actually the propellant burning ground cap being constructed. So the tops of these pipes are the wells, and that's how high the ground is now. This is actually the incineration building, which is now gone. And that's at the north end of the burning grounds. Mostly paper incineration was done there. So we had to bring up the cap over top of where these burning pits were, up many feet just to be able to cover the entire area. And we had to be so many, like 100 feet away from any of where the burning grounds were, so that we'd shed all the water right off. And it does a really good job. It's got a geomembrane on it also, so it can't penetrate through in clay. So if any moisture could get into there, it's going to sheet off of that membrane. So high engineered type of system. Then these wells actually are still the original wells from the 80s that we're sampling today that still have high D&T. So beneath, oh, do I have my, oh, okay. How much time I have? And then down here on the bottom right is the settling ponds. So I do have some more slides. So this picture on the right is showing spoils disposal area 1, I think we called it, which is the largest and deepest. I couldn't believe when I first went out and drilled that in the early 2000s. I didn't really understand the scope of what they were explaining to me. But I was like, this stuff is really black and organic. And I didn't realize that. I was like, oh, I think I know where it all is. I could figure it all out, where the new sand was. And it's many feet deep. That was just an old sand pit that we pumped Gruber's Grove Bay like sludge out of Selling Pond 4. It was a pond, and then it was filled with sediment, and then they dredged it up into this area so then the pond could flow water. So then this was sitting up there in the sand, but it was pretty contaminated when we sampled it. And we think we had removed it all, but there was, I can't remember if it was 10 or 20,000 cubic yards. It's a big sand pit area. Now it's sort of grassed over a little bit, but no fill was really put in. It was just let the grass and try to seed it. Well, good question. There it is. It's all right there. It's all on the screen. It's the landfill. Everything is at the landfill. Here is a picture showing the old landfill that was here in the 80s when we started. And then we started constructing the new landfill. And this is still showing where a bunch of the buildings were out there. We hadn't gotten to rock it. And actually, I was just drilling the well somewhere down here last week. And then this landfill expanded all the way out. I think we have 6 cells. So I think it's about 1,200 feet long. And then we dug it down 50 feet deep to build it up. So it's actually a lot deeper than when you see it when you drive by. There's a lot more material in there. So that's where all this material went, for like settling ponds, buildings. So settling ponds, pretty much going to stop talking about groundwater. And here's just an overview map showing, here's the spoil disposal area 1 that we just had a picture of. And as you can see, looking at this, it's almost 700 feet long. So a pretty big area. Then spoil 2 right next to it is a little smaller. So down here, Selling Pond 4, this is what a lot of the material was pumped up here. And I have a picture showing where the pump was. And that was on the aerial photo. You can see the line all the way up there, and then the black oozing stuff on the aerial photo up in this region as they were trying to fill it up. So that was their environmental sort of like remedy in a way back then, but they were trying an engineering program. They wanted to clear out. They had millions of gallons of water. They had to get out of Settling Pond 4 out into Gruber's Grove Bay. Now, unfortunately, the sediment was really deep right at the entrance of Gruber's Grove Bay. That had been filling up with many feet of sediment also, but that didn't get starting removed until the early 2000s. But so yeah, the Olin engineers had figured out that we could try to work. And so we have every aerial photo available now that either the history group or the library in Madison, that we've categorized every aerial photo available. And now we can pull up every year since 1944 and try to piece together histories, not just the settling ponds, but just other parts of the area. And we've been informing the Army, hey, this is something you need to look at. Did you know this, the aerial photos can tell a good story about something that no one was living anymore. They don't know that. But so up in the upper left, you have Final Creek. This is where the wastewater treatment plant is currently. And then Final Creek is about a mile. And all these were little excavations that were conducted. There was a large excavation here of the creek. Pond 1 was constructed around the time that Vietnam had started. And somebody said we needed to kind of make this more of a pond instead of a ditch. Originally, it was more of just a ditch like Final Creek was. Pond 2, that's the one that had the fire. There was a lot of little more excavations in here for some reason. And then Pond 3 had very few excavations, but Pond 3, we've come to realize, is where other spoil disposal areas were. Area photos show that they were scraping. And I've talked to some people that have worked here in that time. And yeah, people were out there with dozers and backhoes, and they were scraping up material from here and loading it onto the hills and burying it. So there have been excavations up here. And so there is sediment up on top of the hill that maybe not everyone would have thought is there. And Settling Pond 4, that still had some contamination, but a lot of that material was pumped up into the other disposal areas. And clearly Gruber's Grove Bay, I've sampled it numerous times, and we're in a waiting period, I guess, but it's supposed to be dredged a third time possibly. And I had proposed on that several years ago, but the Army has not moved ahead with that. So it's been a long time since it was last dredged. So Settling Pond 2. This is one of my early pictures. I was there the day after it was on fire. I didn't hear about it right away. And so I came on site with the DNR spill coordinator. And we stood on the other side. This is looking west. So there's the road that people walk on over here. And we stood there and watched the flames come in and go. And everyone's asking questions about what's going on. And I said, well, do you know what this is? And yeah, I took a lot of video, orange and yellow. And so I said, this is propellant waste. This is where all the stuff went. I didn't say we cleaned it all up. It's not all excavated. But they were trying to figure out what was the chemical makeup. My friend from Hazardous Materials in Madison, he was asking me questions because they were getting called in, and I sent them the chemical list that says, this is what's in propellant. And they're like, oh, ooh, okay. But, didn't come to realize, exactly the extent. And then, of course, it all grew back and nice and more pretty, but some of the burnt areas were slower. And then the Army says, oh, we have to do something now. And the DNR says, yeah. I don't think it was burning for days just because none of the other areas burnt. They burnt all the other settling pond 3, and that did not burn. So
Did they put water on that fire?
I think they tried, but it also had got a good rain that helped put the fire out. So just some photos showing the layering and some of the burning that had happened. This gray layer is a very dry, dense. I see it a little bit here on the right, very flaky. I knew immediately that it wasn't natural and it was related to, you know, all the water and deposition and stuff. So yeah, we were just out there doing samples within 2 feet, and lo and behold, yes, there is nitrocellulose in the dirt. There is all of the DPAs, diethyl, you know, all those other production chemicals that went into. There's DNT that's above what the DNR says is safe. There's other metals. There was a little bit of we sampled for nitroglycerin. There was probably some low nitroglycerin because that could have been in there. There was benzene. Benzene was product used in the ball powder production, which also drained into this area. So you have there was a lot of different components that were found in settling ponds too. So the Army will be cleaning it up at some point. They will be investigating settling pond 2 in a longer term. But there will be I don't know if I have a slide. Nope. Okay. They will be investigating all of Final Creek. And then this is what is now pond 1 out here, this ditch. And then all the soil disposal areas again. So next year, we're supposed to go out and collect samples to verify if there's still contamination. Clearly not where the excavations happened. So we have those mapped, but so I've been already working on where to go. So we're doing, like, here's an example of what the site looked like. And then I have a couple different years. What's the whole settling ponds like in 1944 when we were in World War II? And so the 49 one is a really good example. This is the bike trail, and there's the railroad at the time. This was Final Creek. This was also Final Creek, but now it's settling pond 1. So at the time, it wasn't that wide. And so more of a channelized flow, very fast moving water. Then pond 2 wasn't even constructed yet. There was a road built. So we have aerial photos showing when that was constructed. And then it was allowed to continue and it migrated through. This is pond 3, but it really wasn't much of a pond. And then you got to the darker area, and this was pond 4. And you can see that now sediment and the black was starting to be accumulated. And then this is Gruber's Grove Bay on the bottom. So some of the sediment had been picking up. And then you can see in 68, so now you're in Vietnam, and this settling pond 1 creek is wider. They're trying to back up more water, so creating a spread where contamination could be further out. Settling pond 2 is now been under construction, so they're trying to widen it. And now in here, they're trying to widen settling pond 3 and scrape it away. So now they're moving the contamination around. And, you know, so now the Army's job is to also figure out, where is it going? You know, where did things move around? And then 2001, now everything's greened up. It's, you know, pond 1 is here. But there was still a lot of excavations. If you saw the map, there were excavations that were just in weird areas. That's because that's where they sampled. They didn't sample the entire site. No one ever like sampled a little grid and said, oh, every 100 feet, we're going to take a sample just because. That's probably more in the up and coming, time that the Army might have to do something. And this just happens to be a great picture that this is an Army project that they surveyed the site where the Gruber's Grove Bay laydown area was started. And then in 2002, they first dredged Gruber's Grove Bay, and that's where they put it all. And this is a plastic membrane underneath the entire facility. That's got 2 dredgings, and it's still out there today. It's covered with a cap right now. So even we moved our material around and, relocated our contamination, but it's still out there, buried inside of it to stay there forever, supposedly. So I have reached my time limit. I'm pretty good at figuring out I can talk that long easy, but I guess it's questions. Dan, is that right? Or okay.
There's a ban on burning on the whole property. When is that going to be lifted?
Well, that's a DNR ban. So I guess it's really up to them. Ho-Chunk was burning.
Yeah.
So we burned by our office. They have burnt a lot out by Big Valley, out in the northwest corner before, but I think they're really concerned.
All the brush piles haven't.
I think people are gun shy about that. I surely would have never recommended they burn in the settling ponds if they would have asked, but that wasn't for us to decide. They had the property. That was their choosing. The deed did not restrict burning. Maybe it should have, but it
Is
didn't.
there any plan on Gruber's Grove Bay?
That has been taken away from me. It is now an Army Corps project again. And so the Army Corps is studying it right now. But they did say that they were going to sample it again. The last time I sampled it was 2018.
They're talking mercury there, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's mercury. So that's benthic organisms that are inside of that gooey stuff at the bottom, the sediment that's kind of, really fine. And those benthic organisms then get taken up into the fish. And that's just another advisory out for eating too much fish. And I mean, in all of Lake Wisconsin, there's an advisory.
What about leaving that bay? It goes all the way down to the dam. Is there any sediment in?
Oh, there was sediment that already left. Yeah. I'm sure there was sediment that left during production.
But can they get past the dam?
It probably, as Charlie Wilhelm said at the dam, he's told me, oh yeah, that's probably way gone by now. That stuff left a long time ago because he worked at the dam for many years. So.
There's a question here.
What's your assessment of where that mercury came from?
So a couple different ideas is, sorry, I didn't, yeah. So question is where did all the mercury come from, potentially, that's in there? So one theory is that during this whole time, there was a lot of mercury being disposed of from paper manufacturing upriver. All these up north paper plants, we took all these millions of gallons and we pumped it into carbon and we cleaned all the water in the plant before it went into production. And then the carbon fines could have then bound the mercury that could possibly be there. And so the carbon is super fine and it's all the black material that we find out there. And that holds on to that mercury. So that's one of, besides mercury was used at the plant, but it's not as in bulk as what you would think. I mean, the lab used mercury. We did a bunch of studies trying to figure out where the mercury could be from, but the amount of carbon that was used to treat the water was massive. The building was very large. It was major beds. So
how did they dispose of that?
that was before, I mean, when we started doing it, then we had it tested and, had to, it was all hauled away, but I don't know what happened before you know, like 96 when, or 96, 97, I don't know what happened to that carbon then.
50s, 60s.
Yeah, I'm not sure what, if they, you know, if they flushed the carbon down the treatment system, but I mean, it's going to stay within the water. But there's still other material in there that isn't that light. It's a really light, fluffy, but then there's also a jelly-like substance that is in there too, which is hard, you know, it like floats within the water.
If rumors were dredged again, which seems possible, right? Ruber's Grove,
Yeah.
would they reopen that landfill right there? And
May.
put the dredgings
Oh, okay.
a third time? in there?
Okay. So the question was, if they were to dredge it a third time, would they put the spoils in the same location and on top of it? And we did an evaluation on it. And if we did it the way we thought we would have, it's not big enough. It would be too engineering. We did a total engineering study on it already, and it would probably not be feasible to do it again. You would have to look at other options. You know, you could build a whole new site. You could build it by the landfill, or you could do something else. Twin Cities Ammunition is doing the same thing, and they are drying it on site and then shipping it to a landfill. So it's got to be pretty expensive, but they are doing a dredging project up there too.
What is the volume of water for World War II compared to Vietnam area? Was there more water, more production?
So what was the volume of water compared to different production periods? I know it's in the 70 million. I don't know all the production records about the amount of water, but I do have, I mean, I think I've gotten some from Badger History Group. I get a lot of information from the Badger History Group, but
I would say in general, the amount of water used here was sort of stable, or about the same amount, depending on how much production there was. But the gallons per ton of ammunition was always about the same.
you needed the same amount of water no matter what
Yeah.
time of year you were using it.
Yeah.
But I have seen records where the water department has the Badger Ordnance Works magazine or paper would come out, and the water department would give their summary. And I've seen, yeah, oh, it was 20 or 30 million gallons per day, and you know, something. They did a lot of publishing of stuff in that newspaper.
Was there more production in World War II versus Vietnam?
I think there was.
Or in Vietnam?
I think there was more than Vietnam. Yeah, Dan.
I have another question. The big plume that comes from the propellant burning grounds goes straight south and then kind of turns over toward the lake.
Yeah.
There's a lot of irrigation that goes on there for agriculture. Do we know what's being drawn out of, what water's being drawn out of the ground and then spread over the crops, and what kind of effect that has?
So the question was about the propellant burning ground plume. The big one to the south is irrigation, spreading that around. Is that contaminated? I have never sampled the irrigation wells myself. I believe that they were tested a bunch in the 90s and maybe early 2000s, but I have no records from any recent testing. They're usually a shallow well. It's very productive sand. And most of the contamination is already sinking by the time it leaves the site. But I cannot there's no guarantees that there isn't some volatiles that they're spreading out there with the spray. I mean, I watch it all the time and I drive by all the time, but no one's ever said, how come you aren't testing that? Well, the farmers aren't really caring. I mean, we've had wells all over their properties and no one ever says, how come you're not testing the water that I'm irrigating? They're not concerned,
What
I
does
guess.
the cows drink? What water does the cows drink?
Oh, at like Dairy Forage?
Yeah.
They have their own sandstone well. We test that every year. They've actually don't had any, and on the farm itself, they haven't had any
But
problems.
they're gonna have a new facility. Are they gonna test there?
We've tested that well that's by the burning grounds, and that was cleaned a while ago. They say they're gonna drink the Bluffview water, this water that is coming to this building.
For people.
Yeah, for people. Yeah. Cows, I think they're gonna be pumping it from that well that you can see near the burning grounds. So I've suggested that there's a study done when they figure out how they're gonna finish the well to evaluate if that's gonna pull any contamination or not towards it. We don't think so, but it's a deep, I think it's almost a 500-foot well. So I wouldn't expect it to, but you know, you don't know until you start doing evaluation.
They're gonna have a lot more cows on the new buildings.
I think a few more. I think it's, from what I've heard from Dennis, it's a little bit more, but not. I don't think they're going to use that much more water. But more people. But more people, I think, will be utilizing researchers wise the facility. Any online? Oh,
Yeah.
any online questions?
No, there've been no online.
Okay, all right.
So as the plumes migrate, have you been able to record any decline in concentrations more, upstream, up near the source?
So like the propellant burning ground, the solvents don't exist anymore up at the burning grounds. That, I mean, if you said, should we clean that up? There's nothing there to clean up. It's all been flowing downstream towards the farms and then towards the Wisconsin River. Or the MERM, the groundwater treatment systems were pumping it out. But it was really high back in the 80s when they started sampling near the burning grounds. The chlorinated solvents was, that was probably smelling pretty bad, I imagine. So it's been declining, even sometimes it's just on its own, or it's moving or traveling, but breaking down some. But yeah, it was traveling and moving before the Army even started cleaning it up. And we've got records, yeah, going back into early 80s still. So, but that's the only one that really has chlorinated solvents. All the other plumes have the dinitrotoluene.
What about the chemicals that was used in firefighting? They did
Oh.
some of that here on Badger. Have you investigated?
Yeah, they're trying. That's going to be the Army Corps again. So they just informing me about it, but I don't actually get to do that work. They've tested a well way south that had some. It's not very high, but they're gonna go test a lot more wells here in the next probably year or two, is what I've been told. So there's definitely going to be a lot more sampling to find out if there actually is more with the wells that are existing, I believe, as they'll try to evaluate, is there something out there to look for? But so far, I haven't seen any evidence that it would be actually a problem based on all the records that we've had, that I would say PFAS was even used. So I'm not sure if it's Frank. Yeah.
The nitroglycerin plume, what kind of concentrations of nitroglycerin are in that now?
Oh, so the nitroglycerin plume, are there so are you, let's see, Frank, are you talking about oh, okay, I call it the central plume, We do not test for nitroglycerin.
Why not?
We test for dinitroptyline, and we've tested for VOCs.
Last a long time.
I don't know if I've really I don't know if we've really done a lot of water testing in the past, we've done a lot of soil testing for nitroglycerin, and it is in some of the settling pond soil.
That's nitroglycerin.
Yeah.
Don't go away.
So no, I do not know.
That doesn't mean it's not safe. I mean,
Right.
These concentrations, not much is going to happen, but I've run into situations where it can accumulate.
Oh yeah.
And if you get let's say, a little pocket of nitroglycerin and something happens, well, it can not be so nice.
Mm. Well, I can imagine you would in your line of work. So.
You should check.
I don't know. That's a tough one to tell the Army to spend some more money.
I know.
Yeah.
It surprises me that a chemical like that lasts 40 years. Well, it can. You've probably heard people find dynamite. You'll find somebody said put their dynamite away, and 30 years later they find the stick of dynamite there, and that nitroglycerin is still, it's going to work just like it's supposed to. So when you get it in the groundwater, it can still be there in an active form.
I don't know that. I don't even know if that's ever been brought up by anybody that has said, "Oh, we should really be worried about that."
I'm not trying to scare people.
Oh no,
Nothing like that, but it's something that you ought to check it.
Well, I have a lot of things that haven't even started yet. So there's like projects just in the waiting that I go, "Hey, remember this? I sent you an email," and then a year later, "Oh, you sent me that email. Okay, well, this is something to think about." So yeah, there's little
And
stuff.
in that area, nitroglycerin in the wastewater went to that little pond there.
Yeah, well, they supposedly cleaned up the nitroglycerin pond or some other drainage ditches, or that was an Army Corps project. It's
Send an
not.
email to the Army.
Let's just say there's a lot of questions that are related to what is the source of this plume, and I get this a lot, and I say it's a lot of production areas, but I can't say there was one little area that was the cause of it, because the sewers were also discharging into ditches around nitroglycerin, and that's the way everything went. And then eventually it could make it into like the settling ponds or some of these other little drainage areas around the area. So that's a good question.
What about the existing ponds on the property? Are they safe? The water in those ponds?
Are the existing ponds safe? Well, there's a ballistics pond, which has been tested extensively, and there wasn't much up there. Every pond so far that I've ran across isn't really near an area that I'm aware would have been
Just
contaminated.
south of the cemetery, there's a pond. It's always full.
Oh, out in Magazine? Yeah, I know nothing about that pond. I assume it's perch water that's clay for some reason, but no, I've never really looked into it. We did the wood duck. We did the wood duck pond.
The reservoirs. One that is completely drained, but the other one's still got water in.
Oh, the reservoir.
Salamanders or whatever.
Oh, the reservoir. Yeah.
Are they still living in it?
I guess that's the DNR now. Yeah, we don't. I look up there once in a while, but I take people up there to look at it. But
Well, it's
yeah.
double fence, so you can't.
The fence isn't that good.
One more?
Yeah.
Oh, I said if anyone wants. to
Oh.
ask one.
Any more questions for Joel? Ori.
Ori.
I remember my son working on the sewer lines, and that they had to open it up and then they had to blow it up to find out if there was anything that would be, be contaminant. And at times it did blow up pretty good.
Oh. So when did he work there?
When
Is he working?
they were pulling out the sewer.
Oh, he was working for SpecPro?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're also digging him out too. Yeah, well, yeah, there was definitely waste, propellant waste probably still lodged in some of the sewer cracks. Yeah, there was many miles of sewer piping that was removed because of that potential issue.
The pumping stations all throughout, are they still workable?
Are the pumping stations workable? Would you talk about like production water?
Well, from the settling ponds west, there's a number of pumps and
Oh, we abandoned all of those pumps. Yeah, all those wells I was there when we filled them all in with grout. And
pump heads are still there.
there's some power boxes that are there, but everything has been abandoned and cut off that were the wells. But no, the Army still left some, like there's a little building out there. There's some electrical cabinets that they left there.
Just off the Sauk Trail, there was a cement structure and it had water in it, and I believe that's empty now.
Is that cement structure down by the co-op?
No.
Oh,
This is, if you take the main road into the settling ponds, the east-west road,
okay.
it's up on the top before you get to the trail. It's where the other main road goes north and south. It's in that area, just to the right. I haven't looked at it in recent years, but it was full of water at one time.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that is.
There was a building there apparently.
Oh, okay.
The cement walls were still there, and it was full of water.
Yeah, I guess I don't get around to everywhere, but we try.
Okay, that seems like we wrapped up and we had another great talk tonight. So much to think about. And
I could talk for
really,
another hour. It would be easy,
really
but-
informative. And really glad that you came and shared your knowledge with us tonight.
Sure.
So
Well, I just dropped off History Museum photos that I copied today, so I'm gonna constantly be requesting assistance.
and we might be going the other way with that. too,
Yeah.
so. Thank you.